There is a moment at most funerals where the family gathers together, and in that gathering, you understand everything you need to know about the people involved. You see who is standing with whom. You see who is at the center. You see who is at the edge. And sometimes, in the most painful cases, you see who is missing entirely. On Monday, May 19, 2026, at Gateway Church in the Dallas area, the memorial service for Joni Lamb, co-founder of Daystar television network, broadcaster, mother, and one of the most recognized faces in Christian media, told a story that had almost nothing to do with the eulogies being delivered from the stage. Because the most important thing that happened at that service was not what was said. It was what was not said. And who was not seen. Let us set the scene. Gateway Church. One of the largest and most prominent evangelical venues in North Texas. A 90-minute service, later released in full on YouTube by Daystar. World leaders and major Christian figures on screen and on stage. Hundreds of people gathered to pay tribute to a woman who had spent decades on television, who had helped build one of the largest Christian broadcasting networks on earth. By every outward measure, this was the kind of send-off that befits a significant public figure. And then there was Jonathan Lamb. Jonathan is Joni's oldest child and, until his removal from the organization, the vice president of Daystar Television Network. He was present at the service. He and his wife Susie attended. They were seated in the front row. And then the details get very specific, and the details matter. Jonathan and Susie were placed on the far right of the front row, separated from the rest of the Lamb family, positioned in a location that kept them effectively out of frame for the cameras covering the service. According to reporting by the Roy's Report, they were physically separated from the rest of the family in a way that was immediately noticeable to people in the room. Jonathan was the only one of Joni Lamb's children who did not speak on stage. His two sisters, Rebecca Lamb Weiss and Rachel Lamb Brown, both delivered eulogies for their mother. Both spoke about Joni's love, her warmth, her strength, her faith. Neither one mentioned Jonathan by name. Neither one acknowledged his presence in the room. At a funeral for their shared mother, in a room full of people, his sisters stood on the stage and delivered tributes that contained no reference to the brothers sitting in the front row. That is not an accident. That is a choice. And it is the kind of choice that tells you something has broken in this family that polished words from a stage cannot repair. Rebecca spoke about her mother's ability to make people feel valued and loved, about the warmth she carried and how she translated it through a television screen. Rachel spoke about what her mother had meant to her personally, about how Joni had walked with her through the hardest season of her life, had covered her, had spoken life over her, had kept her heart soft when it wanted to go hard. Both tributes were clearly genuine. Both women were clearly in real grief. Nobody watching would question that. But the silence around Jonathan's name was loud enough to fill the entire room. Here is the moment that nobody anticipated. It fell to President Donald Trump to be the first person during that 90-minute service to say Jonathan Lamb's name out loud. Trump delivered a recorded tribute from the Oval Office, addressing, in his words, Joni's husband Doug, and her children, Rachel, Rebecca, and Jonathan. He said the family was honoring an incredible life, and that Joni was looking down on them filled with love and joy. He described her as strong and courageous, never afraid to stand boldly for truth and for the Word of God. Think about what that means for a moment. The President of the United States, in a pre-recorded message, named Jonathan Lamb. The sisters who stood on the stage and spoke at length did not. Whatever protocol or preparation went into that service, the result was that a sitting American president showed more visible acknowledgement of the oldest Lamb child than the people who planned and delivered the service itself. Also speaking by video was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who praised Joni for building bridges between evangelicals and Israel, and for her work fighting anti-Semitism and what he described as the spread of lies against the Jewish community and the State of Israel. Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., currently U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, also addressed the gathering, thanking Joni and her late husband Marcus for giving him a platform in 2020 to speak about issues surrounding COVID-19 after Instagram had pulled his account. That detail carries its own weight, given that Marcus Lamb died in November 2021 from complications of COVID-19, a death that came just weeks after he had publicly opposed vaccines on air. Joel Osteen, senior pastor of Lakewood Church in Houston, honored Joni in a recorded tribute, calling her a strong woman with courage and resilience. It is worth noting that Osteen is one of the few major figures who has remained on the Daystar platform despite a significant and widely reported exodus of programming partners following Jonathan's dismissal and the wider controversy surrounding the network. Paula White-Cain, senior advisor to the White House Faith Office and a close friend of Joni's, also spoke by video, describing her as one of the kindest, funniest, smartest, and most loyal people she had ever known, and someone who believed in her when she had difficulty believing in herself. And then there was Jentison Franklin. Franklin is the senior pastor of Free Chapel in Gainesville, Georgia, and one of the most recognized voices in evangelical Christianity. He was one of the very few people at that service who acknowledged Jonathan by name. He said, directly, that he loved Jonathan, Rachel, and Rebecca. He said that out loud, from the stage, which is more than either sister did. And then he pivoted. And what followed was described by multiple people in the room not as a eulogy, but as something closer to a confrontation. Franklin described Joni as a velvet brick. He called her the kindest, sweetest, most loving person and the most loyal friend a person could have, but said she was also a fighter when it came to the gospel. Then he turned his remarks toward the subject of criticism, saying that to criticize is the smallest size, especially when someone is touching the world, especially when someone is preaching the gospel across nations. He said that at some point everyone will give an account for every idle word. He said Joni had to deal with criticism always, and that there will always be haters. He said the Lord had specifically told him to preach this message at her funeral. He did not name Jonathan. He did not name any specific person. But given the context, given the fact that Jonathan Lamb had spent the better part of 2 years publicly raising serious concerns about the organization, about the alleged abuse of his daughter, about the ministry jet, about the honeymoon charges, about being removed from his position, the audience in that room, and the audience watching afterward, understood the target. Franklin was at a funeral, and he used that platform to deliver what people in the room experienced as a rebuke aimed at Joni's grieving son. 2 people in that room were paying particularly close attention to all of this. Kenyon Coleman, a former Dallas Cowboys defensive end, and his wife Katie Coleman, who are close personal friends of Jonathan and Susie Lamb. The Colemans had been invited by Jonathan and Susie to attend the service together. But shortly before the service began, Jonathan and Susie sent the Colemans a text message telling them they had just been informed their friends would not be permitted to sit with them. The Colemans were moved to a different section of the auditorium, seated far away from Jonathan and Susie. They stayed. They watched. And then Jentison Franklin began his eulogy. According to the Colemans' account to the Roy's report, what they heard from Franklin was so offensive in that context, delivered the way it was, aimed the way it appeared to be, at a funeral for a grieving family, that they got up and walked out while he was still speaking. When they did, security personnel followed them out of the building. The Colemans also said that Jonathan and Susie later told them the family had not invited them to Joni's burial. Afterward, Katie Coleman posted on Instagram. She wrote that she had never seen a man and his family treated with more disrespect than what she had witnessed that day in the house of God. She named Franklin, Rachel, and Daystar directly in her post. She wrote that those who spoke from that platform had not stood there to truthfully honor the dead or comfort the living, but to stir conflict in a moment that should have been marked by dignity, grief, and respect. That is not a mild observation. That is someone who was in that room, watched the entire thing unfold from beginning to end, and felt strongly enough to put her name on a public statement about what she had witnessed. Now, let us place all of this in its full context, because context is everything here. Jonathan Lamb was not some distant, estranged relative who showed up unexpectedly. He was Joni Lamb's oldest child. He was the vice president of the ministry his parents built. According to reporting by the Roy's report, his father Marcus left a signed written directive naming Jonathan as the person to lead Daystar after Joni. Jonathan is the one who raised concerns about his daughter's alleged abuse and brought those concerns to his mother. He is the one who was subsequently removed from his position at the network. He is the one who, according to his wife Susie, was never told his mother was dying, and found out she had died after the fact. And at the memorial service held in her honor, he was seated out of camera range. His sisters did not say his name. He was not invited to speak. His friends were separated from him before the service began and followed out by security when they left. And a prominent pastor used the eulogy to deliver what the people in the room understood as a message directed at him. You can agree or disagree with every position Jonathan Lamb has ever taken. You can question his motives, his methods, or his timing. All of that is a legitimate conversation. But what happened at that memorial service on May 19th was visible, documented, and reported by multiple sources. Whatever Joni Lamb meant to the world, and she clearly meant a great deal to a great many people, the service held in her honor revealed that the wounds inside this family are deep, unresolved, and not being handled quietly anymore. There is one more thing worth sitting with before we close. Throughout this entire saga, the controversy over the ministry jet, the honeymoon charges, Jonathan's removal, the abuse allegations, the quitclaim deed, all of it, there has been a consistent pattern. Powerful voices have shown up to defend the institution and to frame critics as troublemakers, haters, or threats to the gospel. Franklin's eulogy fit that pattern exactly. But what no one standing on that stage on Monday seemed to reckon with is this. If everything Jonathan Lamb has been saying is wrong, the response is evidence and transparency. If the money was clean, show the records. If the timeline is innocent, explain it. You do not answer serious questions by positioning yourself at a funeral microphone and telling the world that criticism is the smallest size. Joni Lamb built something genuinely significant. Millions of people around the world were touched by her ministry over 40 years. That is real, and it deserves to be honored. But honoring her does not require silencing her son, separating his friends from him at her funeral, and using the eulogy as an opportunity to rebuke him in front of the people who showed up to grieve. The people who planned that service made choices. Those choices are now part of the public record. And they tell a story that all the recorded tributes from world leaders cannot undo. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Did what happened at that memorial service change how you see this story? Because we are not done yet. Part 3 of this series is coming, and it is going to cover the legal battle that may now be forming around Marcus Lamb's written directive, the estate, and Jonathan's future involvement with Daystar. When we say this story is not over, we mean it. Subscribe now so you do not miss it. We will see you in the next one.